Hey everyone, it's Miss Brooks with your Daily Dose of Math. Today we're going to be continuing our discussion of Section 1 from Chapter 2, and this time we're going to be talking about writing the equations in slope-intercept form. So just so we recall, slope-intercept form is the equations y equals mx plus b, where m represents the slope of the equation, and b represents the y-intercept of the equation. So keeping that in mind, we're going to use y equals mx plus b to write equations of a line. So when you write the equation of a line, there are certain steps that you want to follow to ensure you write the correct equation of a line in slope-intercept form. The first step is to identify the y-intercept of the line. The y-intercept is the location where it crosses the y-axis. So we're going to look on that vertical axis and see at what point is the line touching that axis. The second step is, after you've identified the y-intercept, to identify the slope of the line. So we're going to pick any 2 points on that line and we're going to count the slope, which is rise over run. Once we know the y-intercept and the slope, we're going to plug those 2 numbers into the equation y equals mx plus b. So let's see how this is done. So our first example says write the equation of the line in slope-intercept form. So for this one, we are given a graph of a line, and we need to identify the y-intercept, and we need to identify the slope of the line. So your y-intercept is found by looking at the y-axis and seeing where does the line cross the y-axis. So if we look at the vertical axis, right here would be the point where that line touched the y-axis, which is the point 0, 1, according to the picture, because right here it says that's 0, 1. Now, for the slope, we need to then count the rise over the run. So slope again, rise over run. So what I need to do is, from any 2 points on the line, I need to count the rise and the run. So we're going to use this point here at 0, 1. And we're going to use this point here at 4, negative 2, and we're going to count the rise and the run. So, to rise, I go 1, 2, 3 units down. So that would be negative 3 because I'm going down the y-axis. From the y-axis, I then go 1, 2, 3, 4 units to the right. So I'm running positive 4. So this tells me that my slope of this line is negative 3/4. So once you identify the y-intercept and the slope, we're then going to take those numbers and we are just going to plug it into the equation y equals mx plus b, our slope-intercept form. So y equals doesn't change. M was negative 3/4. The x stays. And the y-intercept was positive 1. So I'm going to write plus 1. So our equation of this line, y equals negative 3/4 x plus 1. Our second example is to write the equation of the line in slope-intercept form given a different graph. So the first thing that you want to do when you are to write the equation of a line is we want to figure out what the y-intercept is. So we're going to figure out the y-intercept by looking at the y-axis and seeing where does our line cross. Well, right here would be the point where the y crosses. So if we take a look, This is 2 units down from the origin. So this is the point 0, -2. Once you know the y-intercept, then you want to count your slope. So to count your slope, slope again is rise over run. So we want to pick any 2 points on this line and count the rise over run between them. So I'm going to use my y-intercept, and I'm going to use this other distinct point on the x-axis, and I'm going to count how much did I rise and how much did I run. So we go up 1, 2 units, so that would be 2 units we rise. And then I run to the right 1, 2, 3 units. So the slope of this line is 2/3. So once you know the slope of the line and the y-intercept, we just plug those numbers into y equals mx plus b, the slope-intercept form. So y equals, m was 2/3, the x will stay in the equation, and then the y-intercept was -2. So we're going to write -2. So our equation of the line, y equals 2/3 x minus 2. Our next 2 examples are going to require us to write the equation of a line just by being given 2 points on the line, not given the graph like we were in previous examples. So we have to use something special called the slope formula in order to write the equation of the line. So we already know that slope is equal to rise over run. And if we think about when we rise, we're going up and down on the graph. That's changing our y values. Whereas when we run on the graph, we're going left or right. That changes the x values. So when we do slope, what we're going to have to do is figure out what's changing in our y values over what's changing in our x values. So we're going to use this slope formula. Slope is rise over run in order to find the slope between 2 points and then figure out the equation of the line without graphing. Our next example says write the equation of a line in slope-intercept form passing through the points -1, -2, and 3, 4. So what we want to do when we are given 2 points, we want to identify what the slope between those 2 points is, and then use that slope in one of the points to figure out the y-intercept. So what we're going to start with is the fact that slope is equal to rise over run. And if you think about when you count the rise over the run, when you rise, that's changing your y values because you're going up and down on the graph. And when you run, that's changing your x values because you're going left and right on the graph. So in order to find the slope between 2 points, we have to subtract the y values and subtract the x values. So we're going to focus first on the y values. So if I look at each of my points, the y values are -2 and +4. So I'm going to subtract going left to right with my points, -2 minus 4. I'm then going to put that over the change in my x values. So I'm going to go look at the x values in my point, -1 and 3, and I'm going to subtract those in the same order, left to right, and put that as the denominator of my fraction. Once I've plugged in my numbers to figure out the change in the rise over the change in the run, I'm going to simplify this to figure out what number is in fact representing my slope. So negative 2 minus 4 is negative 6. Negative 1 minus 3 is negative 4. Once you identify your slope, you do want to simplify it if it is possible to simplify. So 2 negatives I know make a positive. And I also know that 2 can go into both 6 and 4. So I'm going to divide both of these numbers by 2. 6 divided by 2 is 3. 4 divided by 2 is 2. So I have just found that the slope of my line is 3 over 2. Once you have found the slope of your line, you are then going to use that slope in one of the points to figure out the y-intercept. It does not matter which point you want to use, but you must use the slope, and you must pick either the point -1, -2, or 3, 4 to help you identify the y-intercept. I like positive numbers, so I'm going to shoot for the positive 3/4 as my point to use. So to figure out the y-intercept, we have to use our slope-intercept form equation, y equals mx plus b. And what we need to do, since we're trying to figure out b, we have to plug in numbers for y, m, and x. So y and x are going to come straight from our point. M comes from our slope. So if I plug in 4 for y, I will plug in 3/2 for m, and I will plug in 3 for x. And I'm putting parentheses because m and x are being multiplied. And what I'm going to do is solve this equation for b. So 3 times 3/2, remember you only multiplied the numerator, so 9/2 plus b. There's no need to make this stuff decimal, so just leave fractions. And then I need to get the 9/2 on the other side. So I'm going to need to subtract 9 over 2 from both sides of my equation. So to subtract this, first I'm going to need to make 4 a fraction by putting it over 1. And then to subtract fractions, I need common denominators. So that common denominator would be 2. So I'm going to multiply 4 by 2 to get 8. So this is essentially 8/2 minus 9/2. So 8 minus 9 is -1 over the denominator 2. And that number equals my y-intercept. So once you have your slope, which we calculated using the slope formula, and once you have your y-intercept, which we calculated by plugging in a point in slope, we then put all that information together to write our final equation of the line. So remember, this is y equals mx plus b. So y equals 3/2 x, and then b was -1/2. So our equation of the line, y equals 3/2 x minus 1/2. Our next example is to write the equation of a line in slope-intercept form, passing through the points 5, 4, and -1, 6. So for this problem, what we're going to do first, since we need to figure out the slope, is figure out the rise over the run between the 2 points given. Remember, rise is the change in your y values, and run is the change in your x values. So what we want to do is first focus on our y values, and we're going to look at each point and circle the y value. So in 5, 4, 4 is the y value, and in -1, 6, 6 is the y value. So 4 minus 6 would be the change in my y values going left to right, 4 minus 6. Now our x values would then be 5 and negative 1. So we need to subtract these numbers as well, going in the same order left to right. So we're going to have 5 take away negative 1. Don't lose the fact that you're subtracting a negative. Once you've set up your y's and x's, then simplify by doing the subtraction. 4 minus 6 is negative 2. And 5 minus a negative becomes positive 1. 5 plus 1 is 6. And then, of course, simplify your fraction if it can simplify. Well, in this case, 2 goes into both numbers. So the slope of this line would be negative 1 over 3. So once you've calculated the slope, you then want to use that number and one of your points to figure out the y-intercept so you can write the final equation. So we can use either the point 5,4 or the point negative 1,6 along with our slope to figure out the y-intercept. I like positive numbers, so I'm going to use the point 5,4 along with my slope negative 1/3. So again, slope-intercept form says y equals mx plus b. So what I'm going to do, since I need to figure out b, is I'm going to plug in numbers for y, m, and x. I'm going to plug in 4 for y. I'm going to plug in negative 1/3 for m. And I'm going to plug in 5 for x because 5 is what's in the location of x in the point. And then I'm going to drop down plus b. I'm then going to solve this equation for b. So 1/3 times 5, or negative 1/3, will be negative 5/3 plus b. And then I need to get rid of the negative 5/3. So I need to add 5/3 on both sides of this equation. So I'm going to have b isolated. And then 4 plus 5/3. Well, I need whole number to be a fraction, so I can add it to the fraction. And then I need common denominators, which would be 3. So 1 times 3 is 3. 4 times 3 is 12. So this is essentially 12/3 plus 5/3, and 12 plus 5 is 17/3. So my y-intercept is 17/3. So using this slope and y-intercept, we're going to write the final equation by plugging in m and b. So y equals negative 1/3 x plus 17/3 would be our final solution to this problem. This concludes our lesson on being able to write the equation of a line from a graph or given 2 points. If you have any questions, please ask Miss Brooks. Otherwise, I'll catch you next time on your Daily Dose of Math with Miss Brooks.